You know, if I'm being honest, I'm tempted to call the last two issues we went through just plain filler. I mean, issue 55, that's easy enough to say about it because it was such a nothing issue, but 54 at least had some emotional resonance of everything that had finally been sinking in since Robotnik's death and the re-establishment of the monarchy. And the backup issue in 55 was at least trying to continue a couple of those threads, though it sort of had the rug yanked out from under it at the end so that we could get back to the plot happening in the Knuckles book, an arc that we are going to at last conclude in an issue of Sonic the Hedgehog. I can't stress enough how much I hate practices like this, starting a story in one book and then continuing it in another. Even when it works decently, as a customer, I still advocate that I should not be required to purchase multiple lines of books just to understand an ongoing storyline. But enough about that, let's all look at the pretty cover. It's par for the course at this point, but damn, this is probably one of my favorite covers to date for the series. I just love the bright and dark hues of green in the background, and the bright green silhouette of our main villain contrasts brilliantly with the bright pink and yellow of Hyper Knuckles and Super Sonic, respectively. We open the comic itself in some sort of alternate dimension, where our heroes have landed after being banished by Mogul at the end of the last Knuckles issue we covered. According to Knuckles, this is the same place that he ended up when Enerjak had tried to destroy him. Before the three of them can ponder what to do, the platform they're on comes to life and starts trying to eat them. They manage to fight off the weird rock-morphing monster, and our heroes noticed a Thair just hovering in the air nearby. Thinking that he might be the one trying to lead them back to the main dimension, Sonic uses a combination of his speed and the weird gravity of the zone they're in to launch them all toward a Thair, who has somehow managed to open up a portal to lead them back home that looks like they're getting ready to enter the mainframe from Reboot. Meanwhile, back with Mammoth Mogul, he's managed to capture pretty much everyone else in his Chaos Field and has gotten himself some swanky new clothes as he monologues to himself a lot about how no one can stop him, and he'll bring back Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles when their minds have broken, and he'll use them as his own personal strike force. This narration is so long it even bleeds into a caption box during the scene transition, where the few who have managed to escape capture, mostly some random dingoes, ants, and Hershey for some reason it looks like, are trying to figure out what to do next. And then immediately the wall gets blown in by Mogul, who has instantly discovered where they are, and has shown up to squash their rebellion before it starts. Points for efficiency, I guess, but it does make me wonder what the point of this was if these characters weren't actually going to get to do anything. Before he can actually do anything to them, however, a portal opens up behind him, and Sonic and Knuckles jump out, immediately landing some blows on him, and sporting some new armware. Yes, wherever that tunnel that Thair opened for them led, it was a place that had plenty of power rings. Mogul is at first a bit shocked to see them again, since he thought there was no way out of where he sent them, but then he remembers, oh yeah, I have absolutely limitless power at my fingertips, and just blast the two with pure chaos energy, which they then turn around and absorb using the power of their 50 power rings, and the power that he infused them with, like any ordinary Chaos Emerald, to turn themselves super. Once again, Mogul monologues, which he does a lot of in this issue, about how this should be impossible before seeing a Thair standing nearby and realizing he is the constant monkey wrench in his cogs, attempting to destroy him, only for it to be revealed that a Thair was an illusion. And both Sonic and Knuckles use this distraction to land some pretty hefty blows right into the Mammoth's stomach, shattering his armor, revealing that Mogul's Chaos Emerald is actually embedded in his chest, and the one in his cane is a fake. In a brief flashback, we see that the meteorite, or whatever it was, exploded, and the emerald, as part of the shrapnel, ended up buried in his chest, which granted him power, smarts, and immortality, instead of killing him. Magical object or no, a piece of shrapnel burying itself in your stomach is still a cause for concern. He demonstrates his powers by literally taking control of the floating island and using his energy to shift its course, almost like it were his own flying battleship. He says that this is part of his master plan. But for all of his monologuing, we never actually figure out what said plan is beyond that. He uses the shift to throw Knuckles and Sonic off balance before turning his attention to some of the others who are still there, but weren't actually really mentioned or shown before. I could have sworn Sally and Vector were, already captured, but before he's able to attack them, a new fighter enters the arena. A cloaked figure with 2 armloads of power rings who decks Mogul and taunts him into firing his chaos energy directly at him. For all your talk about how smart you are, Mogul, you really are an idiot if you fall for the same trick twice in this many pages. Yes, of course, the stranger was Tails, who thanks to the voices in his head, i.e. the ancient walkers, knew that he'd be able to do the same thing that Knuckles and Sonic did in order to become Turbo Tails. And they proceed to start beating the crap out of Mogul, who now has 3 super-powered beasts to deal with, while Aether watches from nearby. And during this entire thing, Mogul is still talking. He's literally repeating himself now. He's basically just talking for the sake of laying out Aether's plan to counter his plan. How Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are his champions, and Tails is the chosen one, but he'll still win the day, and oh my god, please, shut up! I get that him talking is sort of his thing. There's a way to do a character like this and not have them come off as annoying. But when they do nothing but spout off exposition, even as they're getting the crap kicked out of them, and lay out every single fact that they can so that there's no sort of mystery or wonder left for the audience, that's not entertaining. And any sort of threatening presence Mogul had back when he put this whole plan in motion is dead and buried now. Even when Tails reveals the Chaos Siphon and starts sucking his power out of him, he just keeps going. Refusing to accept defeat, he reveals that he does still have the Sword of Acorns, but then is beset by an army of everyone he's captured, who were freed when he lost a good chunk of his power in concentration. We cut to Locke and his father, who are watching all of this from the safety of New Haven because gods forbid they do anything to directly assist with the imminent threat to their home. No, instead, Locke is more put off by the fact that Aether managed to out 4D chess everyone to make sure that they had a fighting chance against this threat. They do apparently have a plan, but they're not going to act until just the right moment. The right moment was probably a ways back, guys, just saying. Mogul still has his own Chaos Emerald, however, and uses its power as a homing beacon to locate the Chaos Emerald chamber for the island, blasting a hole down into its depths and heading straight for the Emerald. And we see the rest of the battle with the 3 Super Friends fighting him through monitor screens as he uses the power gathered by the other Emeralds to actually incapacitate Tails, Sonic, and Knuckles, and then moves to take more energy from the Emeralds. During all of this, we get to listen to Locke and his dad talk to each other about how amazing the super forms are, and how nice it is to see that Knuckles is the only Guardian to ever achieve that form. And they do something. I don't know what it is that makes the big boom happen, but then we just cut back to everyone being okay in the city. Back with our heroes, no one seems to know what caused the explosion, but they theorize that it was their hyperforms that managed to save them from being obliterated by it. Knuckles says that there were a lot of questions that went unanswered today, tell me about it, but that they will get their answers someday. Ha! Knuckles is given the Sword of Acorns, the real one this time, and presents it to Sally, officially ending the quest that he started way back when. And then we get a scene that I actually do really like between Sonic and Knuckles, as the two of them own up to the fact that they should not have been spending so much time fighting one another, and should have been working together from the start. But then it takes a bit of a weird turn as Sonic basically says that the two of them are kind of out of a job, what with the fact that their major foes are vanquished, and there are still plenty of pockets of lackeys looking to do some harm out there. Sonic says that maybe he and Knuckles should go out into the world and keep doing what they've always done. Fight the bad guys. Knuckles, in a rather nice show of how much he's calmed down since the start of the book, politely and gently refuses, laying his reasons out in a pretty good way. He's still not really had a chance to just sit down and appreciate the fact that he's found his people and his home after years of thinking he was totally alone. and he still wants to get answers for the clusterfuck that's been going on between the Brotherhood and Nether and the Ancient Walkers and such. Add to it, the island still needs a guardian, especially now that they only have one emerald, rather than the emerald and the spare that was powering the island before. And it's here where it is revealed what happened to Mogul at the end of the fight. The explosion basically crystallized him and merged him with the other Chaos Emeralds in the chamber, forming a giant Super Emerald with him at the center. It's apparently actually made up of 14 Chaos Emeralds, but no idea where the other ones came from. Also, very interesting way to introduce the Master Emerald, and yes, that is the Master Emerald, though hindsight is going to make this origin look really weird considering everything that was introduced about it in other media, most notably the adventure games. And so, downtrodden, Sonic returns to Tails, and while he's disappointed that Knuckles wasn't interested in his wish to go out and see the world and do some baddie bopping, he does compliment Tails on being the chosen one. And that is where our story ends, with the promise of Sonic and Tails wanting to leave the safety of Mobotropolis and go out there to see more and more of the world. My god, this issue was frustrating. As a climax to the arc in the Knuckles book, it at least did everything it needed to do. Enerjak is defeated, Mogul is not only defeated but in a state that he probably won't be coming back from for a good long while. The real Sword of Acorns is finally in the hands of our heroes, and it's laying the groundwork for what's going to happen next time for Sonic and Tails. But the execution is just all over the place. I already pointed it out before, but my god, there are so many words. So many! I don't think I've ever read a comic that shoved in so much dialogue and yet managed to say so little of consequence. Obviously, Mogul is the big culprit of this, but it isn't just him. I think I counted one panel in this entire comic that didn't have a single dialogue box. But all of it is either stating the blatantly obvious, digging up references to past stories to try and make sense of everything that's happened before, or Mogul building himself up when, just like the last time we saw him, he just got slammed from the get-go, making all of his planning and posturing sound like a lot of hot air. But that's basically all the character is. A lot of hot air. I also have to admit it was a really unsatisfying way to finish him off as well. It wasn't even Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles that ultimately defeat him. Instead, he was stopped by the Brotherhood of Guardians, specifically Locke, who up until this point have spent the last two arcs doing fuck all, holed up in their tiny computer room, watching all of the action on monitors like they were the night guard at Five Nights at Freddy's. They didn't earn the right to strike that final blow. They did nothing. They spent all of their time wondering if they should do something, and when they should do something. It makes the victory feel really unsatisfying. The big highlight for me was seeing Sonic and Knuckles talk to one another at the end of the comic. And unlike all the talking that went on during the action scenes, their talk actually felt a lot more natural, because it was a much slower, quieter moment, and it genuinely showed how much the two of them have grown and changed, and how much they respect one another now, as well as acting as a good lead-in for Sonic's continuing adventures down the line. The actual flow of the issue is pretty poor too. A majority of the issue was a single fight scene, which makes sense. It was basically setting up for one in the last part of the arc. But if you're going to have an issue be mostly a fight scene, it's gotta be easy to follow. And this really wasn't. I'm going to guess it was a combination of both direction of the writer and interpretation of the artists, because this feels like a pretty big misstep to be just one or the other. Most of the other characters aside from Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Mogul showing up here and there felt really weird, as they weren't really that well established. We didn't see who was captured or wasn't captured, where they were during the fight or what they were doing. There wasn't even a really good indication of where we were because most of the fight scenes consisted of anime speedlines and gradient backgrounds. It's just not consistent in portraying where the characters are. There's also a similar problem to the last issue I covered, where the action feels really claustrophobic a lot of the time, with tight, crowded shots, bringing us in real close to the characters, but it's very disorienting, especially with how overly detailed every panel is during the fight, and with the fact that there's apparently a large mob of other characters just standing off to the sidelines that we never get to see. I can only surmise that the issue was probably running right up against a deadline. Now, this is only a theory, and I can't find any information to confirm anything of what I'm about to say, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But this issue feels like it was either rushed to meet a deadline, or people were just struggling to get it done. First off, there's the fact that neither Ken Penders, who would be the logical guy to finish this story off since it's an arc started in his book, or Carl Ballers, who does work on the issue as a colorist, wrote the issue. It was handled by Kent Taylor, who is actually a pen name for one Scott Fulop, who is a former editor for Archie. And based on this, I think I can safely say that writing isn't really his strength. I mean, since he was an editor for the Sonic & Knuckles books, that does explain how it was able to at least keep the story consistent with everything that came before, rather than last time, where a brand new writer finished off the second half of a two-part story, and it felt very weird and awkward. Not gonna lie, I did actually think at first that Ken wrote this story, because it definitely feels like a Ken Penders story. So at least he did a good job of imitating Ken's style of too much exposition and dialogue, and too little characterization, final scene of the comic notwithstanding. But the big tell for me when it comes to my rushed issue theory is the artwork. If you, like I, felt like the artwork was unusually off during the issue, well, it might have something to do with the fact that we have two different art teams credited here. John Herbert and Harvo handled the bulk of the issue, with Manny Galan and Jim Mosh doing the last 4 pages. Now, Galan and Amash are a good art team, and I don't really have any complaint there. And Harvo's a damn good colorist, but here, I don't know if it was him or Herbert who handled the pencils or inks. They're just credited as the artists. Just as a refresher, John Herbert would leave the series after this issue, and his only other contribution as an artist was the pencils for issue 54, which he worked on alongside Nelson Ortega. So yeah, the art here feels all over the place. At some points, the characters look really simple and off-model, other times they're overly detailed. There's the fact that we barely get any sort of establishing backgrounds or landscapes in the issue, and the colors in the background are constantly shifting, which makes the issue very hard to read and follow. It feels kind of like staring into a kaleidoscope for too long, it's just so disorienting. I wanted this issue to be better than it was. I always want that. It actually seemed like it had some decent setup for a change, but I'm sorry, this issue felt like a mess all around for me. I do appreciate the setup for things to come in the future, but I don't have a lot of good things to say about its present. And what's next in our future? Well, let's see, looks like we're dipping our toes back into the specials this time, when we take a look at Sonic Super Special number 4, The Return of the King. I'll see you next time, everyone.